Welcome everyone to the second video in my production walkthrough series. I'm going to be going over different techniques that I used for percussion, lead elements, bass lines, and effects. So let's get to it and start off with the percussion. Well, first off I have this kick here. This kick has already been processed, so I didn't need to add anything like compression, or at least I felt like I didn't need to. The only thing I did add was some EQ, and I'll show you with and without that. Just adds a little bit more oomph to the low end, and I cut out around 300 hertz just because I felt like it was unneeded information. It just sounded too muddy down there. Next I have the snare, which I have layered, two different snares. I think they're slightly panned to the left and right. I have a 606 and then part of a snare loop that I used. I just cut out the snare that I liked. This is a 606. Next I'll show you some of the loops that I used. This hat loop, as you can see, is part of the snare loop that I cut out just the snare for, except this is the opposite. This is just the hi-hats. I did this so that I could pan the snare to the left, but pan the hi-hats to the right. Over here I have some more percussion, and I didn't notice until now that my automation changes were immediate, which is not a good thing to do. Having immediate changes in audio will cause pops and clicks in your track. So always have some kind of fade in and fade out, even if it's a very quick one. Now let's move on to the pluck. I have this plucky instrument. I believe, yes, it is silent. There's not a lot going on here except for some saw waves and an envelope that's modulating the cutoff. I'm also using a little bit of silence built-in EQ and delay, and I'm using some external reverb that I'm busing to a send track within Ableton. Next, I'll bring up the lead elements. I have a high right and a low left, which are panned. The high is panned to the right, the low is panned to the left. They are the same exact sound, except one's just pitched down an octave. The work I did on this is slightly more intensive. I have some grain delay, saturator, reverb, flanger, some simple delay, and EQ8 in addition to using strobe. Let's take a listen to how it sounds without these effects applied to it. We're not going to hear the reverb because it's being automated right now and it's off. I'm using the simple delay, unlike the grain delay. The simple delay is being used as a panning technique. If you delay on, in this case, the left side a few milliseconds after the right side, then you think it's coming from the right side. So not only do I have it panned to the right, is I have it delayed so that you hear it from the right side first. I go into much greater detail on why and how this happens in another video, which I'll link right here. But now if we look at the low left, it's pretty much the same exact thing, except the simple delay is now flipped. Or it should be flipped. I have no idea why it's not. I can fix that later, but I'm glad I caught that. Now let's move over to the bass line. A quick note that the sidechain compressor is set to peak instead of RMS, so that it quickly ducks and doesn't interfere with the bass of the kick. I use RMS for things like the lead, but not the bass, not the low end. Anyway, I separate the bass out into 3 different parts. I have high, mid, low, and then I have low 2 for a variation of the bass line. It's kind of quiet. I didn't want it to be very loud, but it's panned to the left. And then I have the mid section, which is panned to the right. And then I have the low end, which is just a saw and a sine wave, and that's panned center. And it has a bit of an EQ on it just to cut out all the high end. So the low end is made up of just a sine wave and a saw wave. That's it. I didn't do any other effects to it. When it comes to low end, maybe below 250 hertz or so, I like to have a simple waveform, meaning just a sine wave or a saw wave, square wave, just something basic without a whole lot going on. Not a lot of distortion, not a lot of phasing, flanging, not a lot of crazy tuning and pitchy stuff and LFOs. Use that for the higher part of the bass line, like the other two, the high and the mid section, if you're going to add effects to it, but leave the very low end clean and crisp. Engineers and producers spend a lot of time making the low end sound solid. That's why they use techniques like sidechain compression on the bass and the kick, so that they don't conflict. Now for the mid and the high, it's just an operator with some simple waveforms, flanger, reverb, EQ, another EQ. And for the highs, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference. Now that that's said and done, let's move on to the last part, effects. I have some effects down here. Looks like I have 3 different risers and some white noise. Let's just take a look at how these sound by themselves. Some of these risers and other samples I use are from sample packs that Reddit releases, users from Reddit in EDM production, I think, the subreddit, as well as other subreddits. Like I think there's a chiptune subreddit that releases some stuff too. But definitely head over there and check that out if you're wanting free samples that actually sound pretty good. This riser is made from an operator. It's just a sine wave and it builds up the pitch. Let me see, it has pitch bend. It's bending a lot, that's all it's doing. I just pick a note and it rises up. To change the pitch bend amount, go down here, you'll see right here. Right now mine's set at plus 24, I think the default is plus 5. So basically moving this from the center point up will only increase by 5 steps, while this is increasing by 24 up and 24 down. And the other one I made, the white noise, I'm using an analog, ping pong, and an EQ8. On the screen right now will be another link to a video I made on build-ups and how I make white noise analog build-ups. You see a lot of the sends are sending to reverbs. And I also have some utilities over here. I set the width to 200% so that the stereo image will be increased in volume. Think of it as every track has a center image and a stereo image, what's happening in the center versus what's happening on the sides only versus the center only. And this is just increasing the volume of what's happening on the sides. Another tip is to pan your reverbs. These aren't panned very much, but if you have a track that's on the left and you're sending it to a reverb, pan the reverb to the right side and you'll get an interesting effect. It'll make it sound a lot wider and more spacious. Always remember to high pass everything, no matter what it is, except for bass lines. But other than that, you want to high pass everything. You don't want low end to build up in your mix. I cannot stress that enough. People don't do it, but it will make your mix sound a lot better. Even on the reverbs, I have it high passed. I have everything high passed. Make sure that you pan a lot of elements in your track, but be careful if you're using headphones or just loudspeakers, because it will sound different if you pan in headphones and try to listen to it on loudspeakers. It'll sound really narrow. Or if you pan on loudspeakers and listen to it on headphones, it'll sound extra wide. But that's usually the case. That's usually the standard. People are used to that. The last thing I want to talk about is ozone. Now, what I use ozone for is limiting, of course, and also to check how my song compares to other people's songs. Like here I use some songs by Wolfgang Gardner and deadmau5 and other popular artists. And all I did was play that person's track, record a snapshot, and this will show you the average frequencies when the drop hits. So let's see how my track compares. It's pretty close. It seems to be lacking a little bit in the 370 area, but everything else seems to be on par. That's not a huge deal. The main thing that you want to look at is if your bass line is way too low or way too high, or you see a random peak up here. I've gotten mixes in that I've mixed and mastered from other people who just had their mixes crazy out of whack. You can tell what setup that they had because there was a huge lack of bass and the high end was just screeching loud. But when they listen to it on their computer speakers with a built-in little subwoofer, it sounds fine because the subwoofer is creating an excess amount of bass, which is unrealistic. And maybe their speakers don't have a great tweeter, so they need to crank up the high end because they're not hearing it. I encourage you to comment on this video and let me know how I did. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Is there something I did wrong, or is there something I could do better? Maybe you just have a tip for me, or you want to give me a suggestion for another tutorial video. Either way, comment or message me and let me know what you thought. Thanks for watching.